Diana Prince is Sydney Ryker, an inspiring entrepreneur and transformational speaker. Sydney's journey began 8 years ago when she started with nothing more than a mattress on the floor. She now leads a successful health company with over 7,000 active customers and has built multiple 8 figure global sales organizations. Sydney helps people break free from societal conditioning to uncover their true selves using her own method called identity deconstruction. And that's what we're going to talk to Sydney about today. Sydney, welcome to Diana Prince.
I am so excited to be here.
Well, I am really excited about today's topic because I'm a photographer and I have been on a mission myself to change the narrative for women and the concept of beautiful and how we see ourselves against that concept. I started doing a family photography for a while before I niched down to what I do now, which is only women. When I was doing the family photography, I've had plenty of moms come in and their kids are in matching outfits ready to go, and mom's in sweats with no intention of being in that photograph. Absolutely no intention, obviously. Even when I'm able to get them in the photograph, it's a very delicate situation because the conversation leans into, but I'm a little heavy. I feel a little bloated. I hate my arms. When you mention that you do something that's called identity deconstruct, it just says, I need to get this girl on this show. And we do this to ourselves. I do it to myself. So
Mhm.
I love that you're on with me. I think I want to start off with that. Can you give me a little background on your identity deconstruction method and how
Mm.
you got started with that?
Yeah. So I love that. I love that you shared that because it's hyper relevant, right? To all women. I think no matter what culture, country women have been raised in for thousands and thousands of years, we've had a pressure that men just haven't had to look a certain way, to be beautiful, to look like a princess, right?
Mhm.
That's how we're trained from a very young age as women, and to do whatever means necessary to achieve that, right? Crash diet,
Mhm.
change our appearance through Botox, cosmetic surgery, all of it. And I actually got started in, I guess, this process of my own about 3 or 4 years ago after building multiple businesses in my early 20s and having been modeled. Beauty is successful, right? When you're beautiful, you have a higher likelihood of being successful as well. And so I started to follow suit in that industry that I was in.
Mhm.
And I started to alter my appearance. I started with the basics, dyeing my hair, putting in the extensions, doing my brows. It moved into spray tans. It moved into Botox. It moved into filler. Thank God it never moved into getting my boobs done. But just really started to go down this rabbit hole of feeling that the more I could receive external validation from the way that I looked, the happier I would be
Mhm.
and the more successful I would be. Did not happen like that. And I actually found my way in a very dark time in my life. I found my way to a Hindu monk, and he actually used to work as a NASA space engineer on the Hubble project
Mhm.
at the Kennedy Space Center back in the day. And he was a pilot, super intelligent guy. And he started to study the Siddha yoga lineage, and I got connected with him and I just started to talk to him every single week for about 3 hours a week. And in that process, he invited me into ancient spiritual practices or meditation, whatever you want to call them. And I did a few of there's really a handful of, I call the core four or the core five practices that I started to do every single day. And as I started to do those things every single day, I started to remove a little bit of the wanter energy, right? The ego, the trying to succeed, achieve external validation, and started to rest back more into what I call my true nature, who I really am. And it started to peel off and tear off and rip off some of these masks and some of these identities that I was clinging to dear life for, right? Because I thought that without them, who would I be? What would I be? What would I be doing? And in that process, it was extremely painful. But on the other end of that, it's created a complete feeling of liberation and peace in my life. And so now it's really about paying that forward, sharing the different practices and principles and ways of deconstructing identity that I've learned over the past 3 or 4 years to other people, which has been, such an honor.
Can you break it down? Can you give us an example? Take
So
it away.
I have all of them available for free. They'll always be free. They're on my website. So people can always reference them there. They're called daily practices. But one of them, and they're so funny because when I explain them to people, they're like, "How did that help you like completely change and not do your hair, not do your makeup?" And it's interesting because they're very simple, but they're very effective when we do them consistently over time. So one of the easiest ones people can do is called name that thought practice. And really what this is, it's about quieting the mind because most of the pain and discomfort and disturbance we go through as human beings, especially women, when it comes to our body, is how we speak to ourselves and our mind chatter and the thoughts that we have. Right. And
Mhm.
so we'll have a thought and we chase it and we turn it into a big story and a big to do and a big drama, right? About how we look, for an example. But when you can rest back and name your thoughts and actually name them. So you say, let's say one of my thoughts is, I'm on this podcast right now. I would say, I'm on this podcast right now, thought. And I name the thought. Once I name the thought, I rest back. I see if another thought comes. If I do, I say, okay, that button is red thought. I rest back. I see if another one comes. And what happens when we name the thought and we don't attach to the thought and chase the thought down the rabbit hole of thoughts, right?
Mhm.
We can actually quiet our mind. And when we quiet our mind, we have a clearer picture of what's actually going on rather than being trapped in the mind. And so what you'll find is as you start naming the thoughts just start to go away. And when you can feel
Mhm.
what it feels like to not have thoughts, it's very liberating and it's very peaceful. And so when you do that more and more, you start to quiet the mind. So that's one of the easiest entry level practices that I would recommend to people that you can do in the car. You can do it when you're in a conversation with someone. You can do it when you're trying to go to sleep. And it really starts to quiet the mind and allow you to rest back in true nature rather than that ego.
Name the thought. That's interesting. I'm going to put that into practice as soon as I get on.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's an excellent tip. I even for me, like just getting on this podcast, I'm going into the third season, but just seeing myself in video was a huge. I was afraid.
Yep.
I did the first recording and just threw it out to the universe and never
Wow.
went back. I'm gonna call it for me. I'm gonna call it just a little bit of self love and being able to look at that woman in the way that she actually looks
Right.
versus your concept. It was a little bit of a self love journey for me. So when I went back to those videos, it was like all of a sudden I saw somebody different than that person, than that. Oh my
Yeah.
God, you look terrible in that.
Right.
It was just, yeah, it was a different set of eyes.
Yes.
So it got deconstructed. I can't pinpoint what other thoughts went through my head. I didn't have the tool that you just mentioned, so literally it was just I ignored it. But that's a bigger hurdle, I believe.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a hurdle. So I like that idea of naming the thought, and it's always a good time to take on these,
Yes.
these practices because we're always deconstructing ourselves, aren't we? And so
Oh
there's
yeah.
always some challenges, something we've learned 20 years ago, and I've got a lot of that shit piled on big time.
100%. Totally.
7, so, like, I grew up with Cosmopolitan,
Oh,
and
wow. Yep.
magazine, and every
Totally.
magazine
Photoshop.
going on everything perfectly photoshopped.
Yeah.
Everybody was at that point in time too, also shopping.
Yeah.
You told us that there was a problem
Yeah.
because when I don't know, they did something funky with the sizing back in the day
Oh, yeah.
where they had size 4 of the small size 4.
Totally. Yeah. It wasn't very inclusive. Let's just say that.
You were like, "Help?" It was a tough time to be a woman.
Victoria's
Great
Secret
books,
era. So
and
if you
they're
go to my
great.
website, go to daily practices on the main page and you can just get them sent to your email. I put a little PDF together and you can download them to the drive and save them. And I just encourage people, do one practice a day. Do one practice a day
And
for 30 days and just see what happens, right? There's all different ones and there's little descriptions of what each one can support you with, whether it's healing, whether it's creating more independence in your life, clearing the mind, right? There's 5 of them. If you just do one
mhm.
every day and just see what happens, that's what I did. And it went from these are stupid, right? This is like simple stuff to, oh my gosh, my entire life has transformed in less than 30
Yeah,
days. It's like going to the gym, but for 5 or 10 minutes for your mind.
I'm telling you, I'm grabbing onto the name brand.
It's so
For
good. It's
dear
so good.
life.
Oh my God,
Oh
it's so
my
good.
gosh, that is phenomenal.
Thank
So
you.
let's talk about, let for women, I'm gonna ask you this question. I'm gonna put you on the spot because I'm a photographer. As a photographer, what advice could I give a woman who says she's not pretty enough to be photographed? It is the common
Yeah.
it is the common objection that I get.
Yeah.
Help me out
Yeah.
as a woman
Yeah.
and who's
Well, what I would say if I was you would be pretty enough compared to what? Who are you comparing yourself to? Someone who's been photoshopped and airbrushed and has a full team to make them look that way? Or compared to your neighbor, right? Like it's
It looks more like you, right? Yeah.
and photography isn't exclusive for beauty. Photography is for to capture the real life, right?
Mhm.
And that I believe when we have the flaws and we take off the filters and we can show the wrinkles, if we can show the under eye bags, if we can show the haven't dyed my hair in 6 months, that's the real and that's relatable. And the most beautiful thing is vulnerability. But if we
Mhm.
can't even be vulnerable with ourselves and look at ourselves in a picture and say, oh my gosh, wow, I do look beautiful, then what are we doing?
Yeah.
I think that we don't, when we're in that place, we don't really have a sense of the higher perspective of like God or the universe or whatever you believe we came from, created each of us in a certain way for a reason. And for us
Mhm.
to go alter that to change it to look like the Kardashians just because that's what's trending. In 6 months, they're not gonna have their butts anymore, and you're gonna have to get surgery again to undo your butt thing, right? It's we're following these trends, and if instead we just stopped and which I
Mhm.
did, I stopped doing all these things, and I just don't focus on how I look hardly at all. I found that I have when I do have photos taken of me, I'm more beautiful than ever, and I used to think I was ugly
Yeah.
doing all these things, and now I'm like,
Getting
"Oh my
to
god, I
seeing
have."
you in a photograph,
Yeah, and I
and you gotta break that cycle of not
yeah,
existing in that photograph. The same
yeah,
way I did it when I wouldn't go on a video.
yep,
It
yeah,
was like, "Okay, I'm diving in the deep end."
yes, yes,
But you do have to break that cycle.
yep, yes,
So it's one of those things that it's an ongoing conversation that I have with potential clients, and maybe they, say, "Okay, great, I'm in," or they'll find other reasons not to be. But
yeah,
it's one thing that I'm trying to get women to accept is that, "No, we don't look like." I'm gonna date myself, but because I'm 57 and basically
wow.
grew up with, oh my gosh, what's her name? Cheryl Crawford?
Cindy Crawford,
Cindy Crawford, yes,
yep,
sorry.
yep,
Yeah, it's Cindy Crawford and the Cindy Crawfords, and no, I didn't look like her,
right,
and of course, that to me sent a message that, that with the
that's beautiful,
magazines and everything and how much they were photographed, that's
yeah,
for them. But I want women to accept the way they are as
relational,
beautiful, to go deeper and utilize photography so that they can acknowledge their existence on this earth
yeah,
and their worthiness as well. It's something that I come across way too often, and
I'm sure,
it makes me sad at the same time. That's what I'm here for, and that's why I need down to photograph only women.
I love that.
So thank you. For you, let's just go back to the becoming unpretty. And I'm wondering if this ties into anything. Your favorite book of all time, does it have to do with the becoming unpretty?
Very much so, my favorite are you familiar with the one that I put? Did you see?
No, I don't have it in front of me actually.
So the Bhagavad Gita is my favorite book of all time. It's actually a collection of poems, and it's an ancient Hindu text, and it's about Krishna and Arjuna, and they're having a dialogue, and essentially the poems are a collection of their dialogues. And it's a book that over in India outside of India has impacted millions and millions, tens of millions of lives. And I read it this year, and it was during a huge part of my deconstruction process, and so it holds a
Mhm.
really it's almost like one of those books that they should have you read in school, right? It's like one of
Mhm.
those books that's
Yeah.
pretty esoteric, but it's very much about the basic first principles of life, not chasing success, right? Working
Yeah.
because you love it, not because you have to, all these types of things. And it did support me in my becoming unpretty process, and I'm actually about to reread it again because every time I do read it, it anchors me back in to what's important outside of social media and the way that I look and all. It helps me remove myself from the way that I look and get to the
Mhm.
core of my being and really check in. So I highly recommend it to people. There's a version I can send you that has good dialogue in between because it's pretty, again, esoteric and there's some good descriptions in there in between. So I can send you the link to your readers if they want to read it, but I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. And for our listeners, you also have an offer, right?
Yes, of course. So my offer is my free daily practices. I always like to give those away to people, and I don't because I'm a full-time speaker, my offer is speaking, of course. So if you have a stage and you need someone for a stage, I'm your girl. I can talk about this. I can dive into sales. I can pretty much jam on anything. But I do have a book that will be launching at the end of this year called Becoming Unpretty. And that will be available for pre-order on my site. You'll see it on my site there. So you can go to sydneyryker.com and pre-order the book, and I'll be sure to send it out once it's launched at the end of this year.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're closing out right now because we these are very short episodes. And then Sydney, I thank you for joining me on Diana Prince.
Yeah.
I'm just going to close it out for everyone. Thank you for tuning into Diana Prince Lives Next Door. If you're inspired by Sydney's journey, and you should be, want to dive and you want to dive deeper into her transformational work, be sure to visit her website. It's listed in the description. And remember, just like Sydney, our mission is to empower women and embrace their unique stories and strengths with the Gal Project and Angela Atelier. So let's continue supporting one another and stepping into our power to live our best lives. Thank you. Until next time.
Thanks, Angela.